Hi, folks, with Tacitus Today. Tacitus Today, your pushback channel, and thank you for joining this audio live stream. In this essay, I'd like to talk about the controversial and contentious subject of what is anti-Semitism and what scholarly methodologies or academic methodologies are used to define and frame the discussion around and the definitions around anti-Semitism and its causes and its effects and how anti-Semitism exists at all in Gentile societies. So I guess there's a few things we need to start with. One is there's in the Jewish educational establishments, Jewish schools, there's an absolute fixation with going over in some micro detail all the hurt, slights, and incidences of Gentile, Christian, or even pre that, the Romans and so on, acts against the Jewish people, the Jewish diaspora, and that's whether whether that's in the Levant or the Ashkenazi, Sephardic Jews all around Europe and so on. It doesn't matter, but there's copious notes taken on what seems like the most trivial slides, Jewish yearbooks that are kept in all these different places, whether it be Romania or Germany or France, anywhere these were being kept, and again, a wrong word here or something there, and that's it, anti-Semitism. So the threshold of the bar for anti-Semitism was pretty low, and has been for at least 100 years, and I would imagine quite a bit longer than that. So that needs to be understood, that we're talking about, especially with the devout and the pious and the ones who have a bit of a chip on the shoulder, that they're prepared to accept anything as being anti-Semitic, and we can see this in the the ADL and the SPLC in the United States. It doesn't take much to get them to go to the most extreme rhetoric of Hitler on what would seem to be quite a trivial and trifling matter. So the Jews are taught this, so they're already sort of jangling the jangling nerves. The hypersensitivity is sort of infused in them through the education system. Now, I don't know what other peoples in the world are subject to that sort of education. The education must be pretty good, because the amount of very bright Jews that I've met, worked with, and have been hired by, and ones I have hired, given the amount of the high number of bright ones there, some of whom have an intellect that I've been in awe of, by the way. The education system must be pretty good if it can churn out. Maybe it's particularly rigorous. Maybe the Jewish students really hit those books hard or something like that. But it's probably a mixture of being bright, studying hard, and just putting the effort and the heavy lifting into studies. If we look at the wider discussion about Jewish education and in terms of this infusing them with a sense of hypersensitive victimhood, you don't see this in other education. Certainly not that I'm aware of. As I recall as a kid going through, I came to what they called history when I was at beginner's school. They called it something. Then it became social studies, and then it was actually called history in high school, so senior high school in particular. So just looking at, I don't recall that the white people are oppressed and these are the evils that have been done to Gentile Christians by those other evil people, and we're constantly being oppressed and the evil done to us. I don't remember anything like that. And if it existed, it must have gone straight over my head. I don't remember any of the movies that I saw as a kid sort of talking about this, or mentioning it or anything. There was it's like a specific instance of something, but it wasn't applied as some sort of generic or ongoing issue. So I just didn't see, and even the negativities about other races that were available to make issue of weren't pushed that hard at all. Say merchant seamen who travelled around Asia in the 1800s, especially when the British started getting steamships, and especially then, there was there were people that were recording the treacheries of the Asian, the Asian and their treacherous behaviour. They stab you in the back, and all these sorts of things. But that wasn't something that was taught. It wasn't part of a curriculum. And where say I don't know, the Romans invaded Britain as an example. It was put together in terms of a linear history of, there was the Greek, the Egyptians, there was the Persians, there was the Egyptian, there was the Greeks, the Romans, then there was the medieval time, then there was the Italian city merchant states, then there was Spain and Portugal, and there was France. It was done in a linear sense, and there was and even the wars with Spain and France were put together more in a again these are the events in the history timeline. It wasn't done as part of some sort of horror narrative. Now, if you look at the Jewish sort of bits, then I've managed to get together a bunch of studies here. If you look at the Jewish, the emotive language used is the evil, the horrific, the apocalyptic, the this, the that, and so there's a lot of language. Well, not the word apocalyptic didn't appear, but there's a lot of language in there that's very inflammatory, very emotive, very dramatic language. They can't just tell this is what happened. It has to be done in the full blush of raw emotion, sort of seeping out from all areas. So those are a couple of things just to put in place, that the Jewish education, certainly from what I can tell, correct me if I'm wrong in the comments, the Jewish education is fixated with cataloguing what they see as every wrong ever done to them by those damn Christian Gentiles. So it's not surprising that they view Christian Gentiles with uncertainty and with suspicion. Now, from the studies that I've seen, I got a few together that were from the 1840s. I suppose they kicked off somewhere around the mid 1840s up to the late 1930s. I put 1940, I think, in the description. So we're talking 95 years, give or take. Now, this is a period that the Jewish scholars or researchers have zeroed in on, because this is where they see, in their perception at least, that anti-Semitism worked its way up to a crescendo, and that the Holocaust was certainly in the Jewish scholars from the 1960s, the Holocaust was, as they see, a near inevitable conclusion of what went beforehand. And so they begin the process by saying, well, we, the Jewish people, again, Ashkenazi or not, or whatever, we have done nothing to justify this. We have provoked no one. We are utterly and totally blameless. Not even a fraction of 1% of the blame should lie with us in any sense, as in provocations or so on. The entire blame is with the Christian Gentiles. All of it is with the Christian Gentiles. They either hate us because we're Jewish, anti-Semitism, or they misunderstand us, another form of anti-Semitism, just sort of a misplaced one. Now, there's only those two things. There is no other explanation out there. So this, within that sort of straitjacket, which they seem to need to do to protect their own almost sanctimonious view of things, but it would be hard to sort of subscribe to that for any independent person. Now, all these studies that are done have been done by Jewish, academics or even rabbis and researchers and scholars and so on. So, they're all Jewish, and they're all have come up through the Jewish education system. Quite a number of them, particularly in the 1960s, are also homosexual, which would add to another layer of feeling like an outsider. Now, again, I've been to many schools as a kid, so I know what it's like to be not Jewish, but no, I know what it's like to be an outsider. I went to something like combined with high schools. I think I went to nine different schools in 12 years, I think it was. So quite used to being an outsider and knowing what it's like, because by the time you start to sort of fit in with the swing of things, and you're moving off to another school. So anyway, so the starting in the 1840s, there are a number of revolutions in Central Europe. The 1848 revolutions they were called, and this ended up in the toppling of monarchs and forms of government, and kings and so on were getting kicked out, and it was a time of considerable upheaval. And it was around this time that Karl Marx wrote, with Friedrich Engels, again, two Jewish guys, wrote the Communist Manifesto, suggesting or implying that there was a paradise just around the corner if only we could all be equal and have equal outcomes. Now, at the time, this is when these scholars, these guys doing the study, the Jewish guys doing the study, this is when they perceive, in their perception, that anti-Semitism really started to kick off. And they put a number of reasons for this in there. Again, they're sort of quite unique Jewish perception here, but they say that given the amount of Jews involved in the communist, socialist revolutions, or simply activism, printing pamphlets, being firebrands on the street and that sort of stuff, given Jews were heavily overrepresented there, then the Jews became associated with agitating for mass social change, government revolution, and so on and so forth. And this meant that they were not only fell foul of Gentile Christian governments, but also were viewed with suspicion by the rising middle classes of the time that wanted stability and continuity rather than revolution. The Jewish perception at the time was, well, if we're on the outer anyway, what have we got to lose by having a revolution? So there was different perceptions there. Now, there are a few other things they throw in that I'm not quite sure about, and they're, I guess, somewhat neutral. But given that the Jews were very prominent in banking and finance, and given that usury, charging interest on money, given that usury was something that Christians didn't do to one another, so Jews were very much a prominent part of the financial circles. Then, and you could look at the Rothschilds and the various other groups that were big in that side of things. So governments, once the Industrial Revolution was really taking off, governments didn't need to rely on borrowing money from Jewish financiers. And also, that period, sort of the end of the Napoleonic Wars, 1815, up until the First World War, there really weren't that many conflicts. There were smaller regional conflicts, the Franco-Prussian War or the Crimean War or something like that. But there really weren't sort of major, super expensive conflicts going on that dragged on for years. The conflicts were usually over fairly quickly, within a few months in a lot of cases. So that the Jewish scholars argue in these papers, they argue that changed the power that the Jews had in terms of money lending, because the client states, the Christian Gentiles, didn't need the Jewish funds as much, and this therefore diminished the Jewish position, as in negotiating position, as in leverage, because they would often extract concessions from governments on the basis of, well, we'll lend you this money provided you do this for us, or you do that, or give us these dispensations. So that argument was one that actually probably has some merit, that argument, I think. So they perceived then that as the state became stronger through communications, the centralized state, through communication, railways and telegraph lines, these sorts of things, that it was able to impose a standard definition of citizenship and was able to apply the law. There were local police forces, these sorts of things, and there was the rule of law in the courts and the like. This too, they say, diminished because then Jews sort of had to fit in as ordinary citizens because of the uniformity of the government control of that mid-industrial revolution time. So this militated, they argue in these papers, that militated against the difference, Jewish difference. So any attempt to have separate religious practices, separate behavioural things, and so on and so forth, unique, exclusively Jewish businesses, that started to not be as acceptable given the uniformity of central government control during that industrial period. That too has a point. They raise it as a key point. I don't think it's that, but it is a point. So the papers then argue, and they're reasonably uniform. In fact, that the arguments put forward by an 1850 Jewish scholar and a scholar saying in 1960, looking back through the rearview mirror, with the Holocaust in the rearview mirror as well, the difference in methodology and conclusions is strikingly similar, suggesting that their positions and attitudes and examination of issues hasn't evolved. It's exactly the same as it was from 100 years previously. Now, it shouldn't be that, given all the intervening events. It should have quite materially changed, but it doesn't. The position stays the same, or just about the same, given technological differences and that sort of thing. So having a look at this, the Jewish scholars claim that the incidence of anti-Semitic acts increased. Now they've got sort of a line of Romania, Bulgaria through to Hungary, into Austria, Germany, Poland, and through into France and Britain. Those are the sort of the main cut of countries that they look at. Now Hungary is looked at really in the post-World War I era because it wasn't effectively an independent nation state beforehand. So that comes in a little bit later to the stats they're collating, but they're looking at all the anti-Semitic. They're saying, well, look at the increase in anti-Semitic acts here. Now, it's hard to say to what extent that was the case because more Jews were entering, say expelled by the Tsarist Russian Empire, for example. More Jews were entering Eastern Europe and Central Europe than were there previously, and that they were coming with, they spoke Yiddish and they didn't speak any of the local languages, and maybe they didn't have skills that were useful in the area they came to. So, and these sorts of things. So they recorded all these incidents of what they see as anti-Semitic behaviour, but it's a bit hard to draw a sort of a line on this. There are claims about there's some interesting ones, like a lot of Jews went from Russia into Romania, for example, during the Tsarist expulsions, and because there's a lot of Jews on that Romanian Russian-Ukrainian border at the time. So they because they were being expelled, they moved into the nearest country, and that the local Romanians, who never had a huge prosperous economy, weren't too happy about this, and the Jews were viewed as being rapacious and exploitative of the local peasants and so on. How true that is another matter, but those were the perceptions. So they're saying that anti-Semitic treatment of the Jews in somewhere like Romania was actually higher than it was in, say, Germany or Austria, for example. They were claiming that violent acts against Jews in Britain was higher than it was in, say, France, and so on. So there's Jewish cabals in London where they've sort of stayed within their diaspora very tightly, certainly at the time, and that they're effectively a separate country within Britain. It's not a large number, and there were quite a number of violent acts against them. I don't know if they're, I rate some of these as violence, but so they'd say that the more the less integrated into the Gentile society the Jews are, the more likely they are to suffer some sort of discrimination. Well, that's hardly a revelation. I mean, a high school kid could have told them that, but it's waved around as being something significant in the reports, or in these studies. Now, in the studies, they concentrate on a few things that they argue that there's a perception by the Gentiles that Jews don't integrate and don't want to integrate. There's a perception that Jews will only hire other Jews into the businesses that they have. And once they get into any business, once they're hired into any businesses, they become clannish and they'll only hire other Jews into those businesses. And so that they will engage in untrustworthy business practices. So these are this is viewed as the perception of Gentiles, and one that certainly based on the way that it's written up in the papers that I've looked at, is that's just Gentile misperception. That's just, that in itself is anti-Semitism. Now, and Jewish religious practices, speaking Yiddish in the house and observing Jewish religious practices. Now, I don't know if that's, I don't know what extent any of those things in isolation would cause what they perceive as anti-Semitism. Now, there's some other factors they throw in that are more related to the times, such as after World War I, there was a lot of people movements around, which included a lot of Jews. A lot of Jews went to Poland in Warsaw and so on. There was supposed to be somewhere around 3 million just in the wider Warsaw area, which it seems like a lot, but anyway. So the idea, or what they're putting forward, is that the conditions that created anti-Semitism are what they really should be looking at. They say, well, anti-Semitism occurs. It's not our fault, nothing to do with us. It's the Christian Gentiles are doing it. Why they're doing it kind of doesn't matter. What we need to look at is the conditions in those societies that allowed it to happen. That's what we need to look at. So they're moving back and taking a sort of, or attempting to take a wide angle view shot of societies at the time and say, well, this is how anti-Semitism occurred. Now, this is really a stretch. I understand why they come at it from that direction, but they have to, a bit like Karl Marx in his determination of communism, the working class are oppressed, the oppression is wrong, this is what causes the oppression, this is why it must be stopped. And so that's just a very Jewish way of thinking. And even if you go back even earlier than that, it's the same approach to a problem. Now, the Jews can't be universally like this, otherwise they wouldn't, like Oppenheimer and Einstein wouldn't have invented the atomic bomb if they'd taken that view. That they must have begun from provable science, as in hard science, if they were going to produce that outcome, as in to create the atom bomb. So, not that there weren't others involved like Fermi and so on, so this is a unique Jewish social studies way of approaching things, and that approach has permeated everything that we see in the West today, which demonstrates, in my view, that the Jewish logic of social studies has permeated law, it's permeated history, it's the 1619 project, it's the view on slavery, it's permeated everything. And so we really need to accept that and accept the flaws in that methodology and its self-serving nature, in my view. So coming back to this idea of the conditions that caused anti-Semitism, which is very much where these papers are going, and the thrust of it is, if we can prevent those conditions from reoccurring, we can prevent anti-Semitism from reoccurring, and therefore it is incumbent on us, and we must get others to do this, to assist us. If we must do everything we can to prevent those conditions from occurring again. And so, what are those conditions? Well, the Jews, again, these scholars and researchers, they say, well, Gentile Christian nationalism is on or about the number one factor. So if we can prevent Christian Gentile nationalism, then one of the main stays of anti-Semitism can be removed. So we have to actively work to prevent social cohesion and nationalism among the white Christian Gentile societies. Now, if we look at that today, the mass migration is very much, and the education system, hate white people, hate white societies because they're all evil and bad. It cannot be coincidence that this is one of the number one priorities of the Jewish diaspora, their idea to prevent, or as they see it, to prevent anti-Semitism from ever happening again, certainly on any scale. Then the only way they can do that is by destroying social cohesion and nationalism amongst the uniquely white societies. They don't have to bother about in China or Africa or anywhere else. It can only be Christian Gentile societies, because that's where the Jews want to be. So we want to be in those societies, so they all have to change their behavior to suit us. And this is very much how it's framed and couched with the mass migration. No, you white people, you have to change for the black lesbians coming from Africa. And if you don't, you're fucking Hitler. So that nationalism is sort of one thing. The other thing is that the elements of that social cohesion that are part of the nationalism, such as the family unit, such as these sorts of things, these are also part of what they see as the bulwarks of anti-Semitism, and they throw in some other ones like the Christian religion on its own. Now, again, the attack against Christianity, given that's, I think, number three pillar in the Jewish thing of how anti-Semitism comes about, the conditions that create it, then that's also under attack. And so each one of the key components in these papers, each one of the key components that the Jewish scholars say is the overall conditions for creating anti-Semitism, happen to be the same priorities that are being pushed today by the globalists in order to dismember white Western Christian Gentile societies. Now, it can't be a coincidence. I mean, it's impossible to get that coincidence like that mirrors so exactly. Now, they're doing a good thing by doing this, though. Is this a bad thing? No, of course not. We're stopping anti-Semitism. Anti-Semitism is the baddest of the bad. There is no badder thing than that. And we're stopping that. We are therefore doing a good thing. And if you look at another thing they raise is the overrepresentation of Jews in radical revolutionary movements. They insist this is a misunderstanding by the Christian Gentiles. Now, I would argue that it's not. I would argue that in all the revolutionary movements from the 1840s through to the present day, Jews are at the forefront of these movements. And if you look at the communist uprising in Germany in 1919, a Jewish lesbian school teacher and her Jewish confederate were trying to launch this coup d'état, you could call it, this revolution. And again, you look at the modern feminist movement in the late 1950s through to the early 1970s. Shulamith Firestein, Betty Friedan, Ellen Levine, Rosenberg, Eisenstein. The list goes on. You struggle to find anyone who's not Jewish at the forefront of it, and they're all being given publishing deals by Jewish publishing houses and so on and so forth. Who's paying for them to? This is air travel was very expensive back in the day. Who's paying these people to fly around and give all these agitator, activist talks all around the place? Who's paying for all that? So it's very much a Jewish gig. So any social transformation discussion, certainly since the 1840s, you will find that the majority of those who are at the forefront of this social change discussion are nearly all Jewish, many times lesbian or homosexual as well. So this idea that that's a misunderstanding, Gentiles have got it all wrong, I don't accept that for a minute. And also, if you look at the street activism in Germany in the late 1920s or 1920s through into the 1930s, early 1930s. The street gang goons, the various attempts at micro coup d'état in the various German states and districts and these sort of things. Nearly all Jews. I mean, not all of them, but nearly all of them. Infiltration into unions and all sorts of things like that. Now, a second side of this is the Soviet communist Marxist agitators and stirrers and subversion agents and that sort of thing in the Western world during the Cold War. Their prime targets were Jewish homosexual academics. So they were sought out as being prime targets for subversion. So this created, again, this view, not misplaced, this view that if you're looking for people who want social revolution, then these are the guys that it is. So looking at their view is that and this is stated indirectly, but the hoi polloi, the dumbass end of the Christian Gentile populace, by having the vote, they have the capacity or the facility to create the anti-Semitism that because as an unruly, as they would say, poorly educated, simple-minded mob, but they've got the vote, so they can vote a Hitler into office, and therefore that's a condition that can create anti-Semitism. So their sort of view to this, or their remedy to this, is, well, why don't we neutralize that vote? And why don't we neutralize the power that this unruly Christian Gentile low IQ mob has? Why don't we neutralize that? And that is yet another prevention against anti-Semitism, or the possibility of it. Now, again, this is activists to see Hitler in every coffee cup or floating in every bowl of soup. So it's not hard for them to see anything as potentially leading to anti-Semitism. They're that trigger happy and hypersensitive. But again, we see this requirement that as they see it, this preventative measure against anti-Semitism. We see it already in place now, and if you look at the attacks on Donald Trump, well, he's got those low IQ people voting for him, and as far as the Jewish activists are concerned, that's one step away from anti-Semitism. Hitler is around the next corner. And the amount of times that Jewish activists have accused Donald Trump of being Hitler because he wants a limit on mass migration. And that comes to the next thing, which I've mentioned previously. The mass migration, the Jews sincerely believe that if they could have moved to any country at any time, whenever they felt like it, for any reason, then the Holocaust wouldn't have occurred. That's, I guess, not a completely invalid view. But they're failing to recognize the circumstances of the time, the depression, the mass unemployment, so on. A lot of Jews did move, but only the best educated, best qualified ones. The others couldn't and didn't, and suffered accordingly. So the idea that mass migration, isolation, or low IQ Gentiles having the vote is leads to Hitler. It's insane. It's crazy. Now, I think that in this frantic effort to, as they see it, eradicate all possibilities of future anti-Semitism, I think they'll create the very beast that they fear the most. And by tearing away at the fabric of Western society, they'll tear away the very wealth that the Jews are so desperate to participate in and to benefit from. I think it's a fool's errand. I think they'll end up destroying themselves and being devoured by the very beast that they're trying to lay to rest. You've been with Pastors today, your Pushback channel, and thank you for listening.